People like to mock what they do not yet understand. And few companies have felt that more sharply than Hyundai. Today, the name carries weight in driveways, on highways, and in boardrooms around the world. But in the beginning, it was not a symbol of confidence. It was a target for laughter. Picture South Korea in the years after war. Roads still being rebuilt, factories working under pressure, a nation trying to stand back up with limited resources and enormous ambition. In that landscape, Hyundai was not born as a car company. It began as a construction business, the kind of company that built bridges, roads, and the physical proof that a wounded country could move forward. Yet even then, there was a bigger idea taking shape. The people behind Hyundai looked at an industry controlled by foreign giants and asked a dangerous question. Why not us? When Hyundai entered the automotive world, the answer from the market was often ridicule. The first cars were called cheap. They were dismissed as imitations. Some competitors and consumers saw them as copies wearing a different badge, proof that experience mattered more than effort, and reputation mattered more than vision. In those early days, Hyundai did not inspire admiration. It invited doubt, and doubt can be a heavy thing. It lives in the press, in the showroom, in the silence after a rejection, and in the look someone gives you when they think you are reaching too far. Hyundai knew that feeling well. Yet instead of retreating, the company kept learning, kept building. It kept listening to criticism without surrendering to it. That is where the story becomes bigger than cars. Because at some point, every serious organization faces the same test. Do you accept the label others give you, or do you work long enough to earn a new one? Hyundai chose the harder path. It started with humility, discipline, and an almost stubborn belief that today's weakness could become tomorrow's strength. And if you have ever been ignored, underestimated, or copied by people who pretended your work did not matter, then you already understand the emotional heart of this story. So before we go further, let me ask you something simple. What hurts more, being ignored, being underestimated, or being copied? If this kind of story speaks to you, you might want to stay close because what Hyundai did next would force an entire industry to look again. Hyundai did not enter the automotive world with applause. It entered with suspicion. In the 1960s and 70s, Korea was still rebuilding itself, and the idea that a construction company could become a carmaker sounded, to many outsiders, almost absurd. But Hyundai had already learned something important from building roads, bridges, and cities. Progress does not begin with permission. It begins with discipline. At first, the company did what any young challenger does. It borrowed, studied, copied, and assembled. Its early cars were criticized as derivative, and in many ways they were. Journalists and competitors dismissed them as low-cost alternatives with little soul and even less credibility. The message from the established industry was clear. The market was already occupied, and Hyundai should stay in its lane. But Hyundai did not have the luxury of pride. It had something more powerful than pride. It had patience. Inside the company, the pressure was immense. Engineers worked long hours, often under the harsh expectation that every mistake would be seen as proof that the critics were right. One former executive described the atmosphere as simple but brutal. We could not afford to be average, because average would be used against us. That mindset shaped everything. Hyundai invested in training, in quality control, and in learning from the very companies that mocked it. Not to imitate forever, but to understand what excellence really looked like. And slowly, the tone began to change. The early laughter did not disappear overnight, but it became less certain. Hyundai started building vehicles that were more durable, more practical, and more suited to the needs of ordinary drivers who wanted value without humiliation. That was the real opening in the market. While others sold status, Hyundai sold reliability to people who simply needed a car that would start every morning and keep going. Still, trust is not given cheaply in the car business. Hyundai knew it needed more than improvements. It needed a promise bold enough to expose itself to judgment. So it made one, a 10-year warranty. In one move, the company challenged the entire industry's assumptions about what its vehicles were worth and how much confidence it had in them. That decision was not just marketing. It was a declaration. If Hyundai was going to be underestimated, then it would answer with certainty. And that is where the story begins to turn. Because when a company stops begging to be taken seriously and starts building proof, even its critics are forced to look again. Hyundai understood something that many companies learn too late. Reputation can be damaged in a moment, but trust is rebuilt one decision at a time. So while critics kept repeating the same old insults, Hyundai went to work in silence. It studied what people truly wanted from a car. Not a slogan, not a foreign badge, not a promise that sounded good in an advertisement. People wanted reliability. They wanted dignity. They wanted to feel that their money had bought them something honest. Inside Hyundai's offices and engineering rooms, the mood changed from survival to ambition. The company began hiring talent, studying world-class manufacturing, and investing in quality controls that would have seemed excessive to outsiders. Every panel gap, every engine issue, every rattling sound became a lesson. If a mistake appeared, it was not ignored. It was documented, examined, and attacked. Little by little, the cheap image that had clung to Hyundai started to crack. And then came the move that made the entire industry pay attention: the 10-year warranty. To some executives, it looked reckless. To Hyundai, it was a declaration. It was the company saying, "If we believe in our work, we will stand behind it longer than anyone expects." That kind of confidence does something powerful. It forces people to look again. It tells customers, "You are not taking a gamble with us." It tells competitors, "We are no longer asking permission to belong here." Of course, the transformation did not happen overnight. There were still skeptics. There were still consumers who remembered the old jokes. But now those jokes were meeting a different reality on showroom floors. Hyundai vehicles were improving in design, comfort, and dependability. The brand stopped trying to imitate and started trying to define itself. That is a difficult shift for any company, because it requires patience, humility, and the courage to outgrow your own past. And that is what makes Hyundai's rise so powerful. It was not built on loud revenge. It was built on discipline, on consistency, on the kind of quiet excellence that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. If this kind of comeback story speaks to you, give the video a like. And let me ask you this: when people underestimate a brand, a person, or even yourself, is the best response to argue back, or to become so good they can no longer deny you? Because what Hyundai did next would take that lesson even further. What Hyundai understood, after the laughter faded, was that respect is rarely granted all at once. It is built in silence, in repetition, in the stubborn decision to improve when no one is applauding. While the world remembered the early jokes and dismissive headlines, Hyundai was busy changing the evidence. The company studied its failures the way a careful mechanic listens to an engine. Not for excuses, but for the exact point where the noise begins. And from that discipline came a new identity. The old image of a cheap imitation could not survive the weight of better design, better quality control, and a more serious engineering culture. Hyundai did not try to win by pretending to be something it was not. It won by becoming harder to ignore. The cars got stronger, the styling more confident, and the brand's promises more precise. Then came the bold warranty, a statement that sounded simple on the surface but carried enormous force underneath. If we say our cars are dependable, we will stand behind that claim longer than most of our competitors would dare. That kind of confidence does not just sell vehicles. It changes perceptions. And that is the lesson Hyundai leaves behind. Not that humiliation is pleasant, because it is not. Not that criticism feels fair, because often it does not. The deeper lesson is that being underestimated can become fuel, if you refuse to let it define your ceiling. Hyundai did not need to answer every insult. It answered with results. It answered with patience. It answered by building a company sturdy enough to outlast the mockery. If you have ever been dismissed, compared unfairly, or treated like a lesser version of someone else, Hyundai's story offers something valuable. Time and consistency can become your strongest allies. Keep refining the work. Keep showing up. Keep making it impossible for people to mistake your effort for weakness. If the story stayed with you, leave a like so more people can find it. And tell me, honestly, what stings more in life? Being ignored, underestimated, or copied? If you want more stories like this, subscribe, because there is always another brand that was laughed at before it was respected.